Mohoday is here, I think.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yeah. Ma'am, your microphone is off.
Mohoday, your microphone is off.
Yes, I've unmuted. Good evening, all of you.
Good evening.
Rather, it's afternoon now. Yeah. Deepayan,
Yes, Mohoday.
yeah, I would like to check whether the PPT is going right or not. Should I check it right now or later on?
Yeah, sure. Let me just stop presenting my screen, then you can check.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I have stopped presenting, so you can
Okay, all right. You give me the feedback, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Is it visible?
Yes, it's coming. It's on its way.
Okay,
Yes, it's visible now.
it's visible, right? Okay, all right.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm stopping it right now. Later on, we will start.
Okay, ma'am. Okay,
All right.
Mohammed.
Thank you, ma'am, for being here with us.
Oh, I should thank all of you that you organized such a beautiful lecture series. I don't know all of you personally. You are?
Ma'am, I Oindrila Sengupta.
Oh, you are Oindrila. Hi, Oindrila. Nice meeting you, though
Thank you, ma'am.
virtually. So
Thank
we
you,
exchanged lots of mails, right? You were the one who were mailing me, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay.
It's actually from the organizing committee, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Sure.
Mohuadi Oindriladi is our head,
Okay.
and
All right.
she leads all of us in
Oh, wonderful.
all of
That's
the
wonderful.
programs.
You always
And,
being a very efficient leader.
Yes, and we also have
And she's
Professor
very
Swara
particular
Thacker.
about the mails and all, you know. So yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
I had a kind of an idea.
Yes,
No, ma'am, all
absolutely.
these things are conducted by the entire team. Swara is here, Swara Thacker, Professor
Swara is here.
Thacker.
Hello, ma'am. Good evening.
Hello, Swara. Nice meeting you. So the entire
Thank
team
you,
is very
same here.
young and dynamic, I'm seeing.
Yes, that's
Thank
one
you.
quality that we are proud of.
Yes. Surely, certainly.
Yes.
Oindrila, I think we should
Yeah,
start now. It's 5.
It's 5 already.
Okay. So, can you please check if there is any sound, external sound or not, if everything
Not
is
yet.
clear?
No, everything is clear.
It's pretty clear today. Yes.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. As you all know, the Department of English of THK Jain College is organizing a 4-day online lecture series. And this is the second session. And it's a privilege to have with us Professor Dr. Mahuya Bhaumik as the speaker of today's session. We are really honored. I, Oindrila Sengupta, in charge of the Department of English of THK Jain College, welcome the honorable speaker and all the participants. The rest of the session will be moderated by Professor Deepayan and Professor Swara Thacker. Now I would like to hand over the session to Professor Deepayan. Over to you, Deepayan.
Thank you, Oindrila. Am I clearly audible and visible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
As Professor Oindrila Sengupta has said, today we have with us Dr. Mahuya Bhaumik. Now, it is of course a great honor and privilege, but for me, it is also immense happiness for me to welcome and introduce Dr. Mahuya Bhaumik. For me, Mohuadi, as the speaker of today's session. Dr. Mahuya Bhaumik is Associate Professor and Head, Department of English, Derozio Memorial College. She is a guest faculty in the Department of English, West Bengal State University. Her doctoral thesis was on modernism and T.S. Eliot. Her areas of interest include cultural studies, Dalit literature, partition literature, and gender studies. She has published articles in various international journals like the Greiter, Writers in Conversation, Law Simplegedi, and many others. Her research articles include Surviving in My World, an assertion of Dalit identity, published by Sage Publications. Recently, Flinders University, Australia, has published her interview with Dalit feminist writer Urmila Power. She's also a content writer of UGC Pathshala and many other places. Now, apart from all this, Mohuadi was also my teacher when I was doing my master's in West Bengal State University. And I also got the opportunity to work under her for a brief period, both of these were invaluable, priceless experience for me. That's why I said it's my immense happiness. Now, I can go on talking about Mohuadi, but that's not exactly what we are here for. So let's now try to move on to our main session. The title of her talk today is A Peep into the Urban Existence of Modern Man, reading T.S. Eliot's Preludes and the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Before moving on, I would like to welcome all the participants once again and would like to make a few requests. Please keep your microphones muted and videos off throughout the session. Please don't click on the Present Now button to present your screen. And to avoid all distractions, pin the screen of the main speaker. After this main lecture is over, with permission of Mohuadi, we will conduct an interactive session. So I request all the participants to write down their queries or comments in the Google Meet or YouTube chat box. Now, without wasting any more time, I'll hand over the session to our honorable speaker, Dr. Mohuadi. Please take us to the world of T.S. Eliot. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Deepayan. A very good afternoon to everybody present here. At the very outset, I would like to congratulate the Department of English of THK Jain College, for hosting and organizing this wonderful lecture series, which I believe is so very important and so very pertinent during this particular time when all the educational institutions are closed. And we as academicians, it becomes imperative on our part to carry on with this academic kind of exchanges and academic discourses. So heartiest congratulations for that to the entire team, that is working relentlessly for the success of this particular lecture series, and wish you all the best for all the future endeavors and for the upcoming academic events that you are definitely planning to organize. So best of luck for that. And I'm really happy and I'm thankful. I'm thankful to the principal ma'am of THK Jain College and to the entire Department of English of this particular college, particularly your wonderful HOD. I can see her, and I had exchanged a few mails with her, and the beautiful dynamic team that is there, Swara, Deepayan, and everybody else. I didn't have the opportunity to get engaged in conversation with the other faculties of the department. So thank you very much that you made me a part of this lecture series. I'm delighted. And apart from that, there is of course a very personal reason why I'm so happy today, and that is, definitely you know why. That Deepayan already said that Deepayan happens to be my student, during his days of master's in the university, and he happens to be my colleague, though for a very short tenure. And I have always seen Deepayan as somebody very, very bright, upright, dynamic. No need to fly high, Deepayan. Okay, and he is always very, very sincere. So I'm so happy that he's a part of this college, and he's so enthusiastically involved in the entire process. I mean, the online series that is going on, he's such an integral part of that. So wish you all the very best, dear, and wish the entire department good luck and best, and all my best wishes to all of you.
Thank you.
Now,
Thank you so much.
Most welcome. Okay, and coming to my talk today, since I was approached to deal with these two particular poems of T.S. Eliot, that is namely Preludes and the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, so immediately I could understand that, these are parts of your syllabus. When I say your syllabus, definitely I mean the students of the department, and I hope the students won't mind if I address you as my students also, because since though technically I am not your teacher, but definitely when I'm talking to you today, you are my students and I'm your teacher. So I hope you don't mind if I call you my students. So so then I thought that I need to make things interesting, and so I thought that I would make one PowerPoint presentation where there would be pointers given, and then I would talk to you. I would explain, I would try to explain things to you, and I would try to make things as comprehensible and as lucid as possible. So this would primarily be, addressed to the students here. Now, what I have tried to do in this talk, or what I'll be trying to do during my talk here today, would be to talk about modernism, would be to talk about literary modernism, the salient features, the characteristics of modernism, and then I would be handling the two texts, the two poems. Those have been given to me today, and then I would try to bring a linkage between the two. I mean, I would try to locate them in context of literary modernism. So that would be my primary intention today, to deal with the features of modernism, what do we mean by literary modernism, and then to place T.S. Eliot as a modernist writer, and to locate these two poems of T.S. Eliot as examples, as brilliant examples of modernist literature. So that would be my entire plan. It's very important to share the plan with you, so that you have a kind of an idea as what is going to happen throughout the throughout the entire process. And I must tell you at the very beginning that if I fail to make you understand something, then that is not your fault. That should be considered as my fault, because then I would be, unable to communicate things to you. So, being students, you tell me if you have any problem at the end of the lecture. I'm sure I would be there, to make things, easier for you. At least I would try to do so. Now, having said that, the title of my talk today is, I'm not going to say the title of my paper, but the title of my talk today is A Peep into the Urban Existence of Modern Man, reading T.S. Eliot's Preludes and the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Okay, so I would try to present the PPT here now. So just give me some time. Okay, is it visible?
Yes, Mohammed, it's coming. Yes, it's visible now. It's visible.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Just a moment. Let me make it full screen. Is it fine?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, all right. Okay. So now, if you look at the title, I would, at the very outset, I would say that my talk is, during the entire talk of mine, there would be a disclaimer going along with that when I say modern man, there is no gender bias involved in it. It refers to every modern individual. So modern man refers to every modern individual, and that is the disclaimer associated with my talk today. Okay, now if you look at the first part of the title, then you would see that there are two very important words, the two key words here in the first part of the title. One is urban, the other one is modern. So the entire lecture would be based on what modernism is, or what are the features of modernism, and how urbanization is so integrally associated with modernism and the entire modernist literature. Now, to begin with, we would start with what modernism is. I'm sure you have, you know, quite a fair idea about what modernism is. It was a movement which began during the late 19th and the early 20th centuries in Europe and North America. And it was not only restricted to literature, rather it was far encompassing, it was widespread, and it involved different art forms, you know, like painting, like music, like literature, and there were various experimentations going on in the field of architecture as well, and of course philosophy was there. So it was a widespread movement involving so many facets together. And one of the basic principles of modernism, one of the basic characteristics of modernism is that, you know, there is a very conscious rejection of what is traditional, of something which is already there, of something which is established. So there is a departure, there is a rejection of the traditional forms of art. So now, if there is this rejection, if there is this departure, then there has to be something else, because something else has to be there to which the entire modernist movement has to cling to. And that is why there has to be the evolution or the creation of some newer forms of art. So if the older forms, if the established set patterns are to be forsaken, then there has to be some new forms, some newer, newer ways of expression that would be evolving. And that is why there was the creation of these newer forms of art. And as soon as there were these newer forms of art coming in, obviously that would involve, experimentations with those forms. So newer ways of presenting things, newer ways of delineating things, newer ways of expressing the various facets of modernism. So those experimentations were bound to come along with, the breaking of the traditional forms of art. And along with it, something which was very, very salient, which was intertwined with the entire process of modernism, was the depiction of urbanization. Because we need to remember that the entire thing that was going on, the entire movement, was primarily based on the urban space. So urbanization, the depiction and the delineation of urbanization is very crucial in order to understand modernism. And along with it, something again very integrally linked is the rejection of religious beliefs. Why this is so very important, we would come to know as we move on with the talk today. So there was a kind of a void, there was a kind of a vacuum that was created, and there was a complete rejection of the religious beliefs. Now, let us talk about literary modernism. So the first slide was about what modernism as a whole was, involving the various, the various tenets and the various forms of art and philosophy. Now, since this is a talk primarily based on literature, so we need to understand what literary modernism is. Now, in order to understand modernism, we have to place it in the historical and political context, and we know that whenever we talk about modernism, it is always about the horrors of the First World War, that is 1914 to 1918. So the period before it, immediately before it, immediately prior to it, and the subsequent after effect of the World War. So the entire phase before the beginning of the Second World War, this entire phase was the time of modernism, right? The modernist movements which were going on. And you need to understand one thing, that whenever there has been a war in history, it has always been associated not only with the loss of uncountable lives, not only with the sheer waste of innumerable young soldiers, right? But it is also about the sustained after effect of that, the sustained consequence that has to be faced by any society for that matter, wherever the war had occurred. And this sustained effect was something which was horrifying. Why? Because they were, depression, despair, frustration, the loss of faith, the loss of fellow feeling. There was no bond. There was a sense of alienation. There was a sense of betrayal. Now, why was there this sense of betrayal? Because, before the war, what happens, without going into any kind of political, this is not a political statement, but you have to understand that this is the reality, that before a war, there are lots of promises made. And after the war, when all those promises are shattered one after another, are broken one after another, then what happens? There is a sense of being betrayed. And, all the beliefs, all the faith that you had been, clinging on to, those beliefs, those faiths are shattered. As a result, what happens? There is no absolute truth. All the truths become relative. There is nothing you can hold on to. Nothing is absolute. All the things are, moving past you. So that is why there is this loss. There is this deep sense of loss, of losing everything. The sense of loss, the sense of despair, the sense of frustration, the sense of being isolated, the sense of being alienated. Now, when the First World War was going on, you can understand the panorama, the vast expanse of it. Right? So obviously it refers to the fragmentation and the shattering and the decay, the collapse, the complete disintegration of the Western culture and the Western civilization. The entire civilization was broken into pieces. And as a result, what happened? Life itself was, it could be equated with anarchy. It could be equated with absolute chaos. Life itself became unordered. Now, at the same time, you have to understand that what this alienation is all about, what this isolation is all about. On the one hand, since there is complete loss of faith, so there is, no fellow feeling. So every man, or every woman or every individual, he or she is an isolated self, cut off from the rest of the society. All right, because of the socio-cultural context, because of the political milieu that was there during the contemporary times. So every individual was alienated, cut off, severed from everybody else in the society. The society itself was hypocritical. The society itself was, it was like a facade that was there on the face of every other individual. But at the same time, more importantly, every individual himself was broken. Every individual himself or herself, when I say himself, I mean, again, everybody. It's only for the sake of convenience, because it's not possible to refer to always himself, herself, him, her. So that is only for the sake of convenience. All right. So as I was saying, that so every individual was broken into pieces inwardly. And we need to understand this. See, our entire identity is always an amalgamation, a blending of the outer reality that we can see, the external reality, and the internal makeup, the mental makeup. All right, the mind, the emotions, the soul, all right, the spirituality that make us complete. And when there is no religiosity, there is a complete rejection of the religious faith. As I was saying, that there was a void. The void was rampant in the society at large. This vacuum was there in the deeper core of every other modern individual. So as a result, every individual was broken into pieces because he or she was not a complete whole. Inwardly also, there was that void, there was that vacuum. That is why there is the schism, the split in modern man. When we would go into T.S. Eliot, I would be in a better position to explain this to you. So that is why the sense of alienation is so very critical, is so very crucial in literary modernism, one of the features of literary modernism. And because this vacuum is there, because there is this schism, because there is this split, that is why very obviously there is the dealing with the subconscious, with the inner reality. So in modernist literature, we would find that there are so many ways that inner reality is being addressed, is being talked about. And when we come to the urban space, as I said earlier, that urbanity is very importantly related to modernism and to literary modernism, obviously. So whenever we talk of this urban space, it is always projected as sterile. It is always delineated as barren. It is hollow, it is vast. Now, if you have read The Hollow Man, then you would be able to understand that how, how modern individuals have been projected, how modern individuals have been depicted by Eliot. Eliot says that we are the hollow man, we are the stuffed man. And then he continues after a particular line, headpiece filled with straw. So you see, it is completely devoid of any vitality. We are the hollow men. So inwardly, we are hollow. That is exactly what I'm trying to point at. That vacuum, that void, that hollowness that is there. We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men. Headpiece filled with straw. So you understand. And when we come to the Westland, let me read a few lines from the Westland. Okay, this is from book 1 of the Westland, the part 1 of Westland. Here Eliot says that, how is the city? How is the urban space? And he says, unreal city under the brown fog of a winter dawn. And then after a few lines, he keeps on saying, sighs, short and infrequent, were exhaled, and each man fixed his eyes before his feet. So you see the lack of confidence, the diffidence that is there. No man has the courage to look into the eye of another man, or no woman has the no woman has the courage to look into the eye of another individual. Let's put it like individuals, the entities, all right? So nobody has the courage to look into the eye of another human being, because the sighs, short and infrequent, were exhaled, and each man fixed his eye before his feet. So you understand the lack of confidence, the despair, the sense of loss, the sense of betrayal, all beliefs being shattered. And so that is the kind of, scenario that was prevailing all around when modernism was taking its shape. And in order to give expression to this kind of newer sensibility, so there had to be a very conscious break with the earlier set pattern, with the traditional style of writing, and then came in the expression of the newer sensibilities. And there was the consistent and continuous interrogation and reassessment of whatever had been there earlier, all right, of the established norms, of the established assumptions, of the established set patterns and the art form. So there was a continuous questioning, continuous reassessment, continuous reviewing and reassessing of it. And obviously, as I said earlier, so if these were the things which had to be expressed, then there had to be the experimentation with the forms, the experimentation with the techniques. And as a result, there is such rampant use of symbolism in any modernist form of literature, right? The use of symbols, the use of allusions, the use of imagery. And then there is this sense of absurdity. If you have read, Waiting for Godot or the Myth of Sisyphus, then you would be able to understand what this absurdity is all about. It's the feeling of the life being purposeless. I mean, it's absolutely insignificant. There is no meaning associated with life. So these are the various features, which are there in literary modernism. Now, let us move on to Thomas Stearns Eliot, or T.S. Eliot. Eliot was born in 1888, and he was an American by birth, and he was an American-British poet. He was not only a poet, he was a brilliant playwright, an essayist, and a literary critic. And he was one of the pioneers of modernist literature, along with Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, and many others. And he was one of those figures, one of those literary figures who had laid the foundation stone of modernism, along with a few others. And when we talk of Eliot and we are asked to name one particular seminal literary work, everybody would be naming the Westland. But apart from the Westland, there are so many other literary masterpieces that have been penned by this particular individual called T.S. Eliot. And I don't think whether you know him as a playwright or not. There are so many plays that have been written by Eliot, like The Family Reunion, The Cocktail Party, The Elder Statesman, Murder in the Cathedral, and many more. And apart from this, Eliot's contribution to the field of literary criticism is phenomenal. And he had theorized certain things which became, which influenced the later theorizations immensely. And one amongst those, those theories was the theory of impersonality, which can be found in his essay Tradition and the Individual Talent. The other is the concept of objective correlative, which we can find in his essay Hamlet and His Problems. And I don't know whether you know it or not, that you read the metaphysicals, you read about Donne, you read about Marvel, and so many others. The person who was responsible to give the due recognition to the metaphysicals, it was, he was Thomas Stearns Eliot. It was the essay The Metaphysical Poets by Thomas Stearns Eliot, which gave the metaphysical poets their due credit, their due recognition. So he was the man who was responsible to bring to limelight the metaphysicals also. So his contribution to the field of literary criticism is also immense. So he is not only a brilliant poet, he is also a brilliant playwright and a literary critic. Okay, now we would try to place, as I was saying earlier, that we would try to place T.S. Eliot as a modernist poet. And in order to do so, we have to understand that how T.S. Eliot as a poet, was very close to or was following the features, the salient features of literary modernism, right? So when you go through Eliot's poems, you would find that the poems talk about the disintegration of life, and it talks about the unstable mental condition of the characters delineated in his poems. I'm talking about poem only because I'm talking about T.S. Eliot as a poet, because we would be talking about his poems. So this is particularly based on T.S. Eliot as a modernist poet. So when you go through his poems, you would obviously find this sense of fragmentation, the fragmentary nature of every individual, the sense of disintegration, and the entire mental makeup of the characters that is absolutely unstable. And obviously there is this sense of anxiety, the sense of despair, the sense of being choked, the sense of suffocation, the sense of loss, the sense of being completely disillusioned with life, a complete sense of disenchantment. And fragmentation, as I said, fragmentation is very, very important in order to understand T.S. Eliot and in order to place him as a modernist poet. Why fragmentation is so very important, I have already explained it to you, that every individual was broken into pieces inwardly, and also there was no connection with the society at large. So everybody was isolated. So in order to give expression to that sense of alienation, to that sense of loneliness, this sense of fragmentation has to be understood. So obviously the next point, you can see that there is a portrayal of alienated, isolated individuals. And whenever we see the depiction of any modern man, any modern individual, we find his indecisiveness, we find his diffidence, we find his lack of confidence and his suffering because of the sense of void, which has been brilliantly exposed and explored in Prufrock. When we would go into the poem, then we would be able to relate better. And when we talk of the urban imagery in T.S. Eliot, we always find that it is dirty, it is dingy, it is gloomy, it's sinister, it's kind of filthy. All right, and how Eliot has portrayed the city. I would read from the Westland, The Burial of the Dead. He says, unreal city under the brown fog of a winter dawn. Again, he says in the Fire Sermon, another part, the third part of the Westland, unreal city under the brown fog of a winter noon. So as the day passes, the fog doesn't go. This fog not only talks of the industrial town, this fog not only talks of the dirtiness that is there outside. This is the foggy mind of every modern individual. This is the foggy mind because everything is blurred. Every individual is confused. He or she doesn't know how to act, what to do. Right? As we find in Prufrock that he tries to equate himself with Hamlet, that procrastination, that indecisiveness, that hesitance, all right, so that timidity, That is there. So the fog is the symbol of that. And we find that, the panorama of futility and anarchy, this was the way that the Westland was depicted. This was the description of the Westland, that the Westland projects, the Westland delineates a panorama of futility and anarchy. Now, the Westland was written, in a particular context of the World War, of the First World War, and then there were different other bearings which had their, which were shaping the mental makeup of Eliot himself. That's a long story. We are not going to go into that because we don't have the time for that. But this sense of futility and anarchy, that is palpable in every other poem of T.S. Eliot. It's the same story of futility. It is the same delineation of anarchy that is looming large in all the poems, because the entire setting in the entire modernist literature talks about this futility, talks about this sense of anarchy. Yes, obviously in the Westland, in the context of the World War, that becomes even more comprehensive, even more panoramic. But the sense of futility, the sense of insignificance, the sense of meaninglessness, the sense of everything being chaotic, being disorderly, those are very much palpable in the poems of T.S. Eliot at large. And see, since there is this sense of fragmentation, there is this sense of being alienated and isolated, and there is no rhythm in life, right? So of course, the verse that has to be chosen has to be free verse, because there is no poetry, quote unquote. There is nothing poetic, quote unquote, in the lives of the modern individuals. So there is the use of this free verse, and there is the use of the stream of consciousness technique. So all the thoughts, all the thoughts are getting muddled up inside the brain, inside your psyche. As I say, that everything is getting blurred. All right. So the stream of consciousness technique. And then, as I was saying earlier, that there is the usage and the employment of the allusions. Right. Now, these allusions, if you go through the Westland again, in order to understand Eliot, it becomes kind of mandatory to go through the Westland, in order to get a real flavor of modernist poetry. All right, so I'm sure you haven't read it. You are too young for that. The students, I'm addressing the students here. I'm talking about the students. So now, if you go through the Westland, you would find that after the 5 sections are over, after what the thunder said is complete, then there are 7 pages of notes, and these notes are very meticulously jotted down by T.S. Eliot in order to give the readers an idea about from where the various things have been alluded. So you understand the complexity of the poem, 7 pages of notes given to facilitate the understanding of the reader, because otherwise the reader would be completely at a loss to understand that from where which portion has been taken. So these allusions, so you understand the complex nature of the making of the poem. All right, so there are these allusions. And then another very important thing about Eliot is that there are the usage of multiple voices and points of view. There are the multiple voices and the points of view. You cannot understand that when these points of view are shifting from one to another, when these voices are dissolving into one another and merging into one another, when they are clashing, when they are colliding. So at one moment you find that, okay, this is the particular voice that is addressing the reader. All right, then the next moment the voice changes. It merges into some other voice. Then the next moment there is a clash, there is a collision. And as a result, all the boundaries are blurred. So this blurring, again, see the fogginess, the lack of clarity that is there. Because this lack of clarity, because this essential confusion was part and parcel of the life of every modern individual. So that is why this blurriness, this haziness is there in the poems themselves. All right. And then there is, of course, the conflict of the inner self. As I was saying, that there are the splits, there are the dedoublements, which we would handle in the later course of the talk. And there is continuously the shift of the identity. The identity is in a flux. You cannot specifically say that, okay, this is the identity. The identity is continuously, changing, shifting. There is a discontinuity in the nature of the identity. It is continuously changing, so there is that discontinuity. All right. And the pronouns which are used, you will often find that you, I, who are they? We do not know. Because the pronouns are all indeterminate. You cannot determine, you cannot specify that, okay, this is it, this is he, or this is she. No, they are all ambiguous, they are all indeterminate. All right, so you understand why Eliot becomes so difficult to comprehend. But it would not be difficult for you if you can understand the modus operandi that was adopted by T.S. Eliot in his own working. So now let us look at Eliot's method of working, how he used to work. In his essay, The Art of Poetry, he himself says he always preferred to do things separately and then look into the possibility of fusing them together, changing them, altering them, and then to find out a kind of whole out of them. Now, what does that mean? If you go through Eliot's poems, you would find that there are bits and pieces scattered here and there. All right, so those are all disjointed, apparently disjointed. I repeat, those are apparently disjointed segments put here and there. There are bits and pieces here and there. So Eliot prefers to work like that. Eliot preferred to work like that, that there would be dissimilar things, and the time of composition of various parts were also different. All right, probably he was at one particular mental state when he composed one part, then into another, then another one. So in this way, he put the various things, and then finally he tried to link them together. That means the concept of poetic unity that we find in Eliot is something essentially different from the kind of unity that we find in other poets. Say, for example, the Romantics. Say, for example, let's take a few common examples, right? Say, for example, Ozymandias. If you have read Ozymandias by Shelley, you would see that there is a logical thought process going on. If you have read, suppose, Keats, it is based on the sensuous beauty of nature. If you have read Wordsworth, then you would find that there is the pantheistic creed, the presence of divinity in every object, in however trivial it could be, in every object of nature, and it is the dealing with that. So there is one particular thematic content which has been built upon, which has been logically and emotionally built upon, right? All right. But in case of Eliot, you would not find that apparent logic, that apparent rationality, that that the putting one thing after another in a logical or sequential way, that is not there. Everything is very abrupt. So the kind of unity that you find in Eliot is essentially organic in nature. It grows, it evolves, it changes. And the concept of wholeness that is there, that it is essentially fluid in nature. It is not static, it is dynamic. It gradually evolves along with the reading and the rereading of the poems, right? So it has its own organic growth. It has its own dynamic nature. It has its own fluidity associated with the reading of the poems. And again, in another essay on poetry and poets, in order to understand Eliot, if you go through the essays, it becomes easier to understand Eliot's poems. But since you don't have that literary maturity, you're too young for that, so it cannot be expected that you would be knowing so much. So I tried, to bring in a few things so that it becomes easier for you to understand things. All right, so in his essay on poetry and poets, Eliot says, poetic originality is an original way is an original way of assembling the most disparate, as I was saying, the apparently disjointed, disparate, scattered things, the most disparate and unlikely material to make a new whole. So the whole that is being created, the unity that is evolving, that is new, that is not because of the building up of one after another. All right, that is not, one step after another. Rather, it is something new. It is something which grows out of, you cannot expect it. It is something very, very unexpected, the kind of unity that would be formed after the reading of the poem. So that is Eliot's own method of work. Now, let us go to his choice of materials. Now again, if we go to the earlier, to the Romantic period or the Victorian period, we would find that, there was a gradual movement from the Victorian to the modern, and we find many resemblances between the two. But let's go for the sake of better clarity, let us take the example again of the Romantics. All right, so there we find what, the style arc and the beautiful aspects of nature, and so everything that is quote unquote beautiful, that is soothing to the soul. There is a kind of a mellifluousness. It seems as if there is a lilting melody and somebody is humming into your ears. It's so lyrical, it's so filled with the imagery, right? And all those images are beautiful. Imagery is also here, but those images are soothing. It gives you a sense of comfort, a mellifluousness, the thing of the spontaneity that is there. Now, let us come to Eliot. How he is deviating from the entire poetic, tradition that was there earlier. Now, when I say deviating from the tradition, then again, I need to go to tradition and the individual talent and say that when he is deviating, it is not that he is cutting it off. If you go through tradition and individual talent, okay, limit for now. If we have time, then we would go into that, and I would try to explain that what was whether or how important tradition was for Eliot. That I'll explain later on if I have time after the lecture is over. Let's focus on Eliot's material for poetry now. Now, before going into the choice of Eliot's material for poetry, again, I need to tell you that Eliot was deeply inspired and tremendously influenced by French literature, particularly the writings of Baudelaire and Lafort. Now, after he had read, French literature, now he comes to a kind of an understanding that his own experiences during his adolescent days in the industrial town of Saint Louis, which was his birthplace. So those would also be the material, the content for writing poetry. And he says, again, referring to his essay, to criticize the critic. So you understand how important these essays are in order to understand him. So he says, from him, that is from Baudelaire, as from Lafort, both being French poets, from Baudelaire and from Lafort, I learned that the sort of material that I had, the sort of experience that an adolescent had, that is talking about himself in America, in St. Louis, in an industrial city in America, could be the material for poetry. So before that, he had no idea even that it could be the material for poetry. And that the source of new poetry might be found in what had been regarded hitherto as the impossible, the sterile, the intractably unpoetic. That is exactly what I was trying to point at, that earlier this was thought to be unpoetic, but the so-called unpoetic material, the experiences of the urban life, that became the material for poetry. And here again there is a connection between the urban space that he shared during his own lifetime and the urban imagery that is presented in Eliot's poetry. Now, finally, we come to Preludes. If I had not given you this bit of introduction, then it would not have been doing justice to the two poems that are there. Okay, Preludes, that was composed between 1910 and 11. And here we find, if you have gone through Preludes, you would be able to see that, you know, the images, those have been worked upon in Preludes, those are all related to the drab, the dull, the filthy urban space, and the solitary existence of modern man against the backdrop of that drabness, of that dingy urban locale. All right. Now, if I can give you examples from Preludes, then there will be so many examples, so many images which talk about that essential filth, the sordidness, the dirtiness that is there in Preludes, like, quote, grimy scraps of withered leaves, unquote, quote unquote, faint stale smells of beer, again, quote unquote, dingy shades, quote unquote, the burnt out ends of smoky days, and again, quote unquote, sparrows in the gutters. All right. So these all talk about the, you know, the decayed life, the life that was, you know, in the midst of absolute filth, the squalor that was there in the urban existence. And when we talk of this solitary existence of modern man, there are again references in the poem itself, like vacant lots, like the lonely cab horse. So this vacant, lonely, these are so very important to understand the solitariness, the isolated nature, the alienated existence of modern man, right? Or modern individual. Okay, now you must know this, that initially, okay, you know that Preludes has 4 parts, right? So now the first 3 parts, 1, 2, and 3, Preludes 1, 2, and 3, they were originally titled Preludes in Roxbury. Roxbury was one of the suburbs of Boston. But later on, very consciously, Eliot deleted this particular geographical location. And by this, he ensured that the poem received a wider range of reference. So now the kind of depiction, the kind of delineation of the modern space that is there in Preludes, it could jolly well be related to any modern city, any city during that contemporary socio-cultural context. All right, in that context, during that time. And the imagery that has been drawn here, those have, of course, those have direct bearings upon Eliot's own experiences, as I said earlier, because Eliot himself said. But then, since Eliot was an avid reader, he was tremendously influenced by French poetry, and in Preludes, French poetry, and then, you know, the poetry of Baudelaire. The two English translations of Baudelaire's French poems are Evening Twilight and Morning Twilight. And then there were the 2 novels of Charles Louis Philippe. The 2 novels of Charles Louis Philippe were Boubou and Marie Donadieu. Okay. Now, how was he influenced by this French literary pieces? Now, from Baudelaire, if you go through Evening Twilight and Morning Twilight, you would find that the depiction of the city that is there, it is related to Paris, and it is based on the semi-disreputable aspects of Paris as a city, as an urban space. And there we find that, you know, the smoke is puffing forth from the houses, and the gas jets are there, which are wincing in the wind, and there are the prostitutes who have lined up the streets, and there is that old man who has to toil. He is doomed to toil forever. So you see the parallelism that can be drawn between the images which were presented by Baudelaire and the depiction of the urban space of the city that we find in Preludes. Then again, if we go to Charles Louis Philippe's novels, there we find that, you know, it again talks of a life devoid of any meaning. Again, Philip is also talking about Paris, about the life in Paris, and he says that life is completely meaningless in Paris, and he talks of the essentially degraded, debased, gloomy nature of city life, of urban life. And he delineates Paris in his own way, and he says that the woman had waken up in a slum, the dirtiness, all right, the sordidness that is there in a slum, and then he depicts the hotel rooms where both the body and the mind are soiled. Again, the parallelism with Preludes. So you see that how Eliot was influenced and inspired by these particular French literary pieces. And as we go through Preludes, we find that there is an unromantic squalor, the monotony, the mundane routine of daily life. And this mundane routine has again been presented in Prufrock. Okay. Now, another very important thing in Eliot's poem is that the human beings have been delineated as fragmented. I was talking about the fragmentary nature of existence. I was talking about the fragmentary nature of Eliot's poem. Here, the identities themselves have been negated, their entire identity. They are dismembered body parts. For example, the human beings are delineated, are depicted as short square fingers stuffing pipes, right? Then they are talked of as muddy feet, soiled hands. So they are all negated a complete identity. Their identities themselves are fragmented. All right. So it is either the finger, the feet, the hand, not the individual as a whole. And it talks of the debased, diseased condition of body and mind. Remember the Preludes, the yellow soles of feet. The color yellow talks of jaundice. That means it talks of the diseased condition of the body. It talks of the diseased condition of the mind. Now, while the depiction goes on like that, towards the end of Preludes, we find that there is a very subtle touch of something deeper, something gentler. I would read from the poem, the notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing. All right, so the unmistakable reference is to Christianity, to Jesus Christ, and it talks of the suffering of Jesus for the redemption of mankind. But immediately, as soon as that undertone of spirituality had been there, immediately it is just brushed aside and it said, wipe your hands across your mouth and laugh. So you need to laugh it away. Eliot is addressing modern man, he is addressing modern individuals and says that no, there is no possibility for any kind of spirituality in this wasteland kind of existence of every other modern man. It's hollow, it's futile, it's sterile, it's barren. So there is no possibility of any kind of spiritual solace in the life of any modern individual. So it has to be laughed away. So ultimately, it ends in the eternal cycle of suffering, which is devoid of any vitality, and there is that spiritual void. The worlds revolve like ancient men gathering fuel in vacant lots. So ultimately, it ends in vacant lots, and it is the eternal cycle of drudgery, it is the eternal cycle of pain, it is the eternal cycle of suffering, which has no end to it, no end at least at the end of the Preludes. So we find that the depiction here ends at the essential sordidness, the decayed, wasted, the drab, meaningless, insignificant life of modern man in the urban context. Okay, so now we would move on to the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Okay, now this is one of the phenomenal works of Eliot as far as his own compositions as modern, as specimens of modernist literature are concerned. Now, when Prufrock was initially written in his early drafts, Eliot gave the subtitle Prufrock among the women, and then he discarded it. The obvious reason for discarding it was that Prufrock, this particular poem, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, it is multi-layered. There are so many significances associated with it. It is not only Prufrock's relationship with the women. And when he talks of the love song, yes, obviously there is the reference to Kipling's poem, The Love Song of Ardayal. But you have to understand that there is a dichotomy from the very beginning of the poem. There is a split from the very beginning of the poem, particularly when we take the title in consideration. The love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. If you look at the first part of the title, the love song, then immediately some kind of romantic expectation is there in the mind of the reader, that it has to be something romantic. There are some romantic associations which evolve. But that is immediately after that, after the preposition of, that is just cut off. Of whom? Of J. Alfred Prufrock. Such a prosaic name, such a mundane name, which has no association with romanticism, in any way. So the love song, the expectation that is evoked at the beginning, that is, absolutely shattered towards the end of the title, J. Alfred Prufrock. And the name Prufrock, that was taken, from a furniture company, the name of a furniture company. You can see from the PPT that it was from Eliot's youth in St. Louis, where Prufrock Litton Company was there. It was a large furniture store. So you understand the very prosaicness of the name. All right, now, as we talk of the urban imagery, we find that again, there are autobiographical references because the fog that has been talked of, it is the fog that Eliot used to see, coming from the chimneys, coming from the factory chimneys across the Mississippi. And he used to observe that. So that is the fog that is being talked about. And then his own experiences in Paris and in London, those were there. Now, as I was saying that Prufrock, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock is much more than a single reading can offer to us. There is a split, as I was saying in the, during my earlier part of the talk, that there is a split in a modern man. That split, that schism has been so brilliantly delineated through the psyche of Prufrock. On the one hand, Prufrock, yearns for romance. He expects a kind of romantic association with a woman whom probably he is addressing. I say probably. Why I say probably? I would handle it a bit later on. So he yearns for romance. One half of his self yearns for romance. But the other half of his self mocks and parodies his very own desires, because that half knows, that social self of Prufrock knows that the society which he inhabits, it is not going to accept that kind of romantic aspiration. It is not going to permit that kind of romantic yearning of Prufrock. So having that complete self-consciousness, Prufrock himself negates his own expectations. On the one hand, he aspires for romance. On the other hand, he parodies, he mocks his very own aspirations. So that is why there is this split in his psyche, and there is this conflict, and this conflict can be very well related to Eliot's own personal conflicts, which were there. Again, that is a completely different, perspective, and that cannot be handled during this time frame. Probably I'm already running late. Actually, this is so vast that in order to do justice to the poems, I need maybe I don't know, maybe 10 minutes more. I don't know. All right. Now, another important thing is that to whom Prufrock is addressing the poem. That is why I said that apparently he is talking to the woman. It could be the woman. It could be that Prufrock is, sharing an internal monologue. He is talking to himself. It could also be that he is talking to the readers. He is addressing us, the readers. It could also be that Prufrock is talking to his maker, to his creator, that is Eliot himself. We do not know. That is why I say that it is multi-layered. It is filled with significances. Then again, the you and the I was talking about the ambiguous nature of the pronouns while I was talking about literary modernism, right? So here you would be able to relate you and I. Who are they? They could be the splits of Prufrock's own personality, his own psyche. It could be the relationship of Prufrock with the woman. It could again be the you and the I. It could be Prufrock and the readers, us. It could also be the Prufrock as the character and T.S. Eliot as the author. We do not know. It's also indeterminate. The you, the I, the pronouns. Now, let's take up this concept of Prufrock's journey, right? He says, let us go then, you and I. Is he really undertaking any journey? Or the whole thing is, it's just a play that is going on in his mind, in his psyche. Why are we asking this question? You might ask me that, why are you even asking that? Is he really undertaking the journey? I'm posing this question because Prufrock is so very diffident, he is so very hesitant, he cannot take a single decision. And in order to prove that, I can give you so many questions that Prufrock poses throughout the poem. There's a list of those questions. Here I go. Do I dare disturb the universe? Then he asks, how should I begin? Then again, shall I part my hair behind? Again, do I dare to eat a peach? And it goes on. So how should I presume? How should I begin? So a person who asks so many questions, is it really feasible for him to undertake a journey confidently when he says, let us go, then you and I? We do not know. We do not know whether the journey was metaphorical or it was in the literal sense of the term. Now, so we find that Prufrock, he's the embodiment of the frustration, the diffidence, the hesitance that is there in modern man, and he represents the thwarted desires, as I explained, the split personality, the schism that is there in his personality, in his psyche. So he represents those thwarted desires, the tortured psyche, and the complete frustration and disillusioned state of his being. And that is why there are the uses of the fragmentations and the juxtapositions, and he is always an elusive self. Sometimes he is Guido, sometimes he is Lazarus, at times he is John the Baptist, and then he says that he could be Hamlet, but yes, of course, he could not be at the end. So continuously, the self is, again, that discontinuity is there. It is changing, it is in a state of flux. And there is a schism between the social self, as I said earlier, and his inner being, the latent emotions which are deep down inside, the emotional yearning, the romantic yearning that is there, in contrast to the social self. So basically, Prufrock inhabits two worlds at the same time, and that is why he is so hesitant. He is always confused, and there are the voices, there are the multiple points of view. Now, I very intentionally I just avoided the second point in my PPT. You can look at that I said that there was a dispute regarding the overwhelming question. Now, what that question was. Again, if I have time, I would go into the question because it has a long literary history. I don't know how much time I have, so let's skip it for now. We would go into it if we have time. All right. Now let's focus on the latter part of this particular slide, where it says that Prufrock can never be isolated from his own environment. In fact, this poem was considered to be a critic, to be a satire on Boston society, And Eliot denounced the Boston society because he said that it was quite uncivilized, but refined beyond the point of civilization, quote unquote. All right, civilized, uncivilized, but refined beyond the point of civilization. So Eliot can never be taken away from his own space, from his own urban space, right? All right. So now, another thing which is, very important is that at the end of the poem, we find that there is a kind of temporary respite. It's a marine paradise that has been created. A marine paradise, something beautiful. And there are references to Baudelaire, there are references to Novel. So that marine paradise, is it the reality? Is it the permanent respite? No, it is not. It is the temporary respite, because ultimately, modern individuals have to drown, have to be immersed in suffering. And this image of drowning had been worked consistently by Eliot in the Westland also. Death by water, if you go to the Westland, you would be able to find out that how this concept of suffering has been integrally associated with the image of drowning. So here also, the respite, the marine paradise that has been evoked, that has been created at the end of Prufrock, that is, temporary, but ultimately there is no possibility of escape. There has to be that drowning, there has to be that suffering, and that is why perhaps Prufrock says that I have measured out my life with coffee spoons, and he says, and he talks about his own days as the butt ends of my days. So just as this butt end, this ending, the burnt out ends of the cigarettes, this is the common image in Preludes and in Prufrock. So it means the insignificant life. It means the life which is devoid of any kind of vitality, any kind of meaning. So these are the two poems which are there in your syllabus, and I have tried during this limited span, to do some kind of justice to both the poems. And now, after both the poems are over, you must be wondering that why is it so difficult? I mean, why are there so many voices and so many illusions? And you know, what is the exact impact of Eliot's poem on the readers, on us? Here we go. If we can quote from Bath, Rolla Bath, The Pleasure of the Text. You know, in this particular essay, The Pleasure of the Text, Bath is talking about two kinds of texts, the readerly text and the writerly text. I repeat, the readerly text and the writerly text. The readerly text offers us pleasure. So see, text of bliss as opposed to text of pleasure. So the readerly text offers us pleasure. Why does it offer us pleasure? Because, you know, the reader's position as the subject remains unaltered. It is like, taking a mug of coffee and lying down on your couch and relaxing with a with a bestseller. That is the pleasure that you get. So the position of the reader as the subject, that remains unchanged, that remains unaltered. But what does a writerly text do? The writerly text offers us bliss. What kind of bliss? Here, the reader has to put in real effort in order to understand the text. And there, the reader's own position is unsettled. The reader's own comfort zone, the reader has to come out of his or her own comfort zone. His or her own assumptions, own preconceived notions about literature, everything goes for a toss. And that is the exact thing that happens when we go through Eliot's poems. It unsettles the reader's historical, cultural, psychological assumptions, the consistency of his tastes, values, memories, and it brings to a crisis his relation with language. So Eliot's poems, Eliot's works are, the writerly texts, which are the texts of bliss as opposed to the texts of pleasure. It unsettles us, and that is the beauty of the text. It forces us, it compels us to ponder, to look into the various meanings and to reread the poems. So, having said all of this, you might be wondering that, so at the end of the text, at the end of this lecture, what do we get? That it only talks about the frustration, it only talks about the despair, it only talks about the disillusionment of the modern individuals, of modern man, of modern woman, of any other modern being. Does it only end there? It is so pessimistic. Okay, Eliot had been searching for that truth. Modernism searches for that truth. So Eliot was searching for that truth, for that spirituality throughout his poetic career, one poem after another. But he could find nowhere that kind of serenity, that kind of solace that could be offered. The thing, the principle of life, which could turn the wasteland, which could turn the sterile, barren land into something fertile, into something meaningful. He came to the last section of the Westland. The last section of the Westland is What the Thunder Said. And there, at the end of the poem, we find that there is the fable of the thunder, and there are the three das. It is not T-H-E, it is D-A, da. And these three das are references to the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. All right, it shouldn't be so complex to you. I would try to make it easy. That throughout the Western, Eliot had been an avid reader throughout his life, but nowhere would he find a remedy to this sterility, to this infertility, to this impotency that from which the entire Western civilization was suffering. till the point he came to the Upanishads, that is our Eastern, Eastern philosophical texts, the Upanishads, and particularly the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where he found 3 mantras of life, or the 3 principles of life, the 3 das, which are Datta, Dayatvam, and Damayata. Datta means to give, Dayatvam is to be compassionate, to be sympathetic to others, and Damayata is your own willpower to be self-restrained, to give into self-control. So you should give away, you should learn to give, you should learn to be compassionate towards others, and you should have that self-restraint and self-control in you. If the modern civilization can practice these 3 principles of life, then Eliot at the end of the Westland says, then that is the only remedy, then that is the real way to get that spiritual redemption, the spiritual salvation. And therein would come Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So these are the 3 words with which the Westland ends. And I would like to end my talk today with these 3 words. Let this Shanti prevail everywhere, particularly in this context when every day we find that so many people are dying all across the world. Probably this is, this is a very befitting conclusion to Eliot's to the talk of mine regarding Eliot's poetry. So let this Shanti prevail. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I think I have taken a long time, right?
Not at all, not at all, Muhammadi. I was perplexed, and I don't know. It was enlightening.
I'll drink some water, please.
Please. It was enlightening. It was also detailed and rather vast, and I was in awe that you could actually touch upon so many things in such a brief time. From the very core essence of modernism to the very intricacies, like the images and the symbols of the 2 poems and the histories of their compositions, and also the theoretical frameworks through which we can reread the 2 poems. And beside the 2 poems, you also added so much from the Wasteland, and that is such a vast poem in itself. I think it becomes a complete whole that
yes, Deepayan, unless we touch upon those things, those references, I cannot do justice to Eliot's poem. So then the entire explanation would be quote unquote fragmentary. So in order to give expression to that, the students must understand the entire context. Then they can, carry forward with their own understanding of the poems, but they have to have that comprehensive knowledge, otherwise it becomes very, very impossible to understand Eliot.
Yes.
So that is why I thought to present it in this way. I hope it has been helpful for the students.
Yes, ma'am, it surely is. Surely. It was a wonderful session. We all enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you so much.
Not only the students, we are thoroughly benefited with your lecture, and I hope we'll get more chances to listen to you in future.
Yes, definitely. We can always go into this kind of academic exchanges that are always beneficial for all of us, because see, we all are students of literature. Till now, we are all students of literature. So the more we exchange ideas and thoughts, the better it is for us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
So Muhammadi, with your permission, we can move on to the interactive session.
Yes, certainly.
And we can take some questions. So Swara, I request you to conduct the interactive session. Google Meet while I take in charge for the YouTube.
Okay, all right, sure. The first question that I found in the chat box was that a person is asking, how can we read Prufrock from the psychoanalytical lens?
Okay, all right. Yes, absolutely. As I said earlier, that, it all deals with the psyche. Okay, there I can give you a very interesting quotation. Okay, this is from Lawrence Perrine, and Lawrence says that this poem, Prufrock, presents the apparently random thoughts going through a person's head within a certain time interval in which the transitional links are psychological rather than logical. All right, and here we can also talk about the concept of dedoublement. Now, what is dedoublement? In order to understand Eliot, we need to understand dedoublement. Because of the paucity of time, I did not go into that detail. But since you were talking about the psychoanalytical approach, so then the concept of dedoublement becomes, mandatory to be explained. Now, Eliot was deeply inspired by Laforgue, and Laforgue was writing all those kinds of internal monologues, and there was a kind of an auto-irony involved in Laforgue's writing. And then, in order to explain the way Laforgue was writing, Eliot said that he was adopting the technique of dedoublement, and this concept of dedoublement is the splitting of the self into the subject and the object. So the own self is divided into two halves, the subject and the object. Now, when one part of the self is thinking or acting, in Prufrock's case, he is thinking, right? He barely acts. He cannot act. I'm no Prince Hamlet. All right. So the impulsiveness that Hamlet gathered at the end by killing his uncle impulsively, that impulsiveness was not there in Prufrock. All right. He shared the indecisiveness of Hamlet, but he did not share the impulsiveness of Hamlet. All right. So that is why at the end he says that, no, I'm no Prince Hamlet. All right. So in Prufrock's case, he is only thinking. Now there is a split. This dedoublement talks about the split, where the single self is the subject as well as the object. And when one particular self, one particular aspect of the self is thinking, is pondering, then the other half of the self is watching that self who is thinking. All right. So this is the concept of dedoublement, the splitting of the self into two. One self, on the one hand, there is subject, the other hand, there is the object, the same self. And then when the subject is thinking, the object is looking at it. It is exactly the same thing that is happening to Prufrock, that on the one hand, he's one aspect of his self is yearning for romance. He is trying to propose the lady love. But the other half of his self is mocking, is parroting, because he knows that he would be categorized. He would be pinned. Remember the pinning, the pain that is associated with being pinned. So he would be categorized, and he doesn't want to be categorized. He doesn't want to be trapped by the society which would mock at him, which would jeer at him. And that is why he avoids being confronted with that overwhelming question. As I was telling you, that overwhelming question that, that has a long history associated. If there is any question regarding that, then I would explain that. So definitely there is that psychoanalytical approach that is there. And if we talk of Freud, then Freud has said that when we negate a particular idea, then that is the expression of our repressed desire. So maybe that he says that I'm no Prince Hamlet, or he wants to be Lazarus, he wants to be Prufrock, he wants to be Hamlet, he wants to imbibe so many roles. That means probably he wants to be like that. There is that repressed desire, but there is the negation of that. All right, so, linking it up to Freud. So I hope I could answer the question.
Yes, definitely, ma'am. Okay, another question is that can you please repeat the part of alienation? What is the reason of modern people being so isolated? Why don't they have friends? Somebody has asked that.
Okay, all right. Yes, when we talk of alienation, we talk of isolation. Now see, during that time when urbanization, industrialization, those were rampant, those were occurring so fast in the city, and there were so many people flocking in. And remember, if we go back to the Victorian society, all our preconceived notions of religiosity, those were shattered. There were the theories of Darwin, there were the theories of Charles Lyell. So the entire concept of Christianity, that human beings were at the pinnacle of glory, they were the supreme creations of the Almighty. That essential story of creation was being interrogated. There was the process of natural selection. There was the survival of the fittest. So those were going on in the Victorian society. And as I said, that the journey from the Victorian to the modern, that is, that one age glides into the other. So those were already there. And then there was the industrialization. Then there was the urbanization. Then there were the threats of the World War. which were, knocking at the door. So with that context, every individual was struggling to meet his or her own ends. So that social life which was there earlier, that was not there. That was not there. And if we go to the Victorian age, we would find that because of the emergence of the middle class, there was a void that was created. All right, there was a continuous movement up the social hierarchy. So there, all these things are integrally associated. And then, when in the modern age there is this urbanization, this industrialization, and everybody is fighting it out for his or her own sake, then the social life that was there, that was cut off, that was severed. But apart from that, which is very, very important, is that in order to be a complete individual, we need to have a perfect combination of the external self that we can all perceive, that we can all see, and the inward reality, our spiritual self. In the modern age, that spirituality was just not there. It was a void, it was a vacuum. So if that spirituality was not there, if your inner core is a vacuum, how can you be a complete individual? So inwardly also, you were alienated. And that is why there was that split, there was that confusion, there was that sense of diffidence, right? So externally, as far as the society is concerned, the modern man or the modern woman or modern individual, he or she was alienated, he or she was isolated, and at the same time, inwardly also, he or she was not a complete individual, because life itself was sterile, life itself was devoid of any kind of meaning. It was an insignificant existence.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So I was going to ask you a question. 2 or 3 people have mentioned it, that how can you link the concept of alienation or modernism with absurdism? So you have already, just now you said that life has
absolutely that purposelessness of life.
Yes.
Right? That is what we talk about absurdity, that it's absolutely meaningless. And there was a complete religious disposition. So the spiritual disposition, the meaninglessness, the futility, the anarchy, everything could be linked up together.
Okay, ma'am. So one last question from the Gmeet chat box, that is there any way for the modern man to revive the loss of spirituality in the present situation?
In the present situation, yes, I'm a very optimistic person, right? And if in that scenario, when the World War was going on, if people could survive and, holding their heads high, if people could survive that kind of a crisis, then why not we? Why not we? Of course, we need to be positive, we need to be optimistic, and just as Eliot himself gave the mantra at that point of time, I'm sure we would also find some kind of solace, some kind of fulfillment in our lives, and definitely we would emerge victorious. I'm very optimistic, and that is why I ended my presentation with that note, that there has to be some kind of optimism. Otherwise, what should we cling on to? We need something, right?
Very true, ma'am. We will surely overcome this crisis as well.
Definitely.
Okay, now Deepayan, you can ask questions from YouTube now.
Yes, I got a couple of questions from YouTube. I think the first one, this is asked by Amit Sarkar again. This is, I think, kind of already answered. He asked in what ways Preludes critique society's lack of values and rootlessness. I think the alienation question is...
Yes, I've already explained it.
Yeah.
Yes.
The second one is more interesting. He says that can we apply feminist theory in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock? And
I knew this would come.
and Mohwari, I have...
and that is why that disclaimer was there. Yes.
Mohwari, I have a little bit of my own question to add to this feminist theory. Like, is there some kind of objectification going on through the Prufrock narrative? Because he objectifies women. I can see the arms already. I know the arms, and then he kind of fragments the women's
the brown
bodies,
hair, the arms, Yes.
And ultimately, if we come to the theme of Prufrock, coming from this question, if we come to the theme of Prufrock, ultimately, what is Prufrock's confusion? Is the confusion roots or arises from the non-reciprocation of Prufrock's libido? This is my question.
Okay, now in order to answer this, we need to go to Eliot's own biographical details a bit. I mean, remember during my presentation, there was one slide where there was this very subtle mention that Prufrock's own split, the conflicting, the tormented self of Prufrock can be related to Eliot's own conflicts. And yes, this has a long history involved in it, because if you go through Prufrock's own biographical details, if you read Peter Ackroyd, if you read Lyndall Gordon, then you would find that, Prufrock's own relationship with his, with his wife, that was an essentially difficult and complex kind of relationship, right? And when you go through this kind of biographies, you would find that these are all written from the perspective of Prufrock himself. From Eliot himself. We are continuously talking about Prufrock. All right. So these were all from the perspective of Eliot himself. There is another beautiful biography of, of his wife, Vivian. Eliot's wife was Vivian, and that is by Carol Simmer Jones, Painted Shadows. The title of the biography is Painted Shadows. There you would find that there is a completely different perspective of Eliot's own life, the marital conflicts, his relationship with various other women. So all these things, I'm not going to go into the details because that would take, hours to deal with. That all those things had tremendous bearing upon Eliot's, the kind of characters that he composed, that he delineated. And that Eliot talked about impersonality, that this is something we are treading into a very debatable area here. That when Eliot talked about the theory of impersonality, there are questions that why was this stress on objectification? Why was this stress on the distancing of the writer from his personal self? Was there any personal compulsion behind it? Was there anything that Eliot himself wanted to hide? That in essay after essay, not only in tradition and the individual talent, but in essay after essay, he was trying to focus on this objectification, on this need of impersonalization. So there, his relationships with women, that is very, very important to understand. If we need to understand, the question that has been posed, that the feminist perspective, that can be there, and the repressed libido. Yes, of course, the thwarted desires which were there. I mean, which could be related, which could be addressed. Obviously, there is no denial to it. But at the same time, I would add that when he talks of fragmentation, remember, if you remember the Preludes, then you would find that there, the fragmentation is also there. But that is the fragmentation, the dismembered parts of the body of a man in most of the cases, that the stuffing of the pipes. So it is, it would not be probably fair enough to say that, yes, with Prufrock, it had to be deliberately the women, but yes, Prufrock among the women, as I told you initially. So it was basically his relationship with the women. All right, so basically the way the women were presented. So that is, of course, there. That perspective can never be denied. But at the same time, the dismembering, the fragmentation, the negation of identity, that is not only related to women, that is, yes, that is there in Prufrock. But if we talk about the other poems, there we find that the negation is offered to men as well. But definitely there is no denial to the fact that yes, there can be a very good and intense, in-depth reading of the feminist reading of Prufrock. From that perspective, but that was not my area today. That is different, definitely another area, because here I was about to address the students, so I thought that let's take it from the modernist perspective. But yes, of course, that libido, the suppression, the thwarted desires, and the way the women were presented, the perfume, the hairy hand, the brown, everything, those are so palpable that yes, that thing is unmistakably there in Proof.
Okay, thank you, Mohammadi. I think it's already time. It's 6:30, so let's not go into any more questions, because there are many. I suppose Swara will also find many other in Gmeet, and I'll also find many other in YouTube. So
Yes, and you know, it has been lovely talking to you all and addressing the students. I hope the students have understood what I tried to convey. I tried to be lucid, I tried to be, you know, comprehensible. I hope it had been helpful for them.
absolutely, Mahuadi, and this is just the juncture where we are going to start our third and fifth semester, and these are the two texts that we have in our fifth semester.
Yes, I know.
So I think the students will be immensely benefited from today's session, and we
My
too, of
pleasure.
course, as Oindrila said. So as we come to the end of the session, I'll hand over this to Oindrila, Professor Oindrila Sengupta, to deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you.
Thank you, Deepayan. Um, respected, this respected speaker and dear participants, on behalf of the Department of English, I, Oindrila Sengupta, in charge of the Department of English of THK Jain College, like to extend a hearty vote of thanks to Professor Dr. Mahuya Bhaumik for this insightful lecture, and we are thoroughly enlightened regarding this T.S. Eliot and his world. And I hope that all the participants are satisfied and benefited with this thoroughly nuanced and insightful talk. I'm sure that your valuable insights will help them to read and reread the works of Eliot and to explore the world. And yes, it's really in these days, we are actually facing the troubles day in and day out. And I really expect that we'll definitely overcome this time. And yes, T.S. Eliot is always there to decode the complexities and agony of the modern life. Thank you so much, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and being with us.
Pleasure is mine.
And
Okay.
now I would
Stay safe, stay good.
and I would also like to express my gratitude to the college authorities and our principal, Professor Dr. Mausumi Singh Sengupta, for providing us the opportunity and support for organizing this lecture series. Lastly, I would like to thank all the participants for their patience and cooperation. We have two more important sessions for you on 17th and 21st of August, respectively. On 17th of August, we'll have our third session from 6 p.m. onwards. And you will get the, definitely, I hope that you all have subscribed to the channel THK Jain College Media, and you will definitely get the notification for the upcoming session. And the Google Meet link will be the same for the other two lectures, and the feedback form will be provided on the last day of the series. And please stay tuned, and thanks again, all of you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Mahuadi. Thank you, everyone, all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Swara, so I'm ending the live stream now.
Yeah.